Hey everybody, my name is Jill Doney, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make a really versatile recipe called pâte à choux. Now this is the dough used to make all sorts of really delicious pastries like cream puffs and profiteroles and eclairs and beignets. I go on and on. And the best part is that it all comes together in less than 15 minutes. Now by the end of this tutorial, you will not only be a pâte à choux master, you will also know a little bit about the history and the science behind this truly one-of-a-kind recipe. So one of my favorite parts about this recipe is that it only takes 6 ingredients to make. You've got flour, water, butter, sugar, eggs, and salt. Now I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that 99% of you already have this in your kitchen right now. And if that's the case and you're in the mood for an eclair, go ahead and preheat your oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. And while you're at it, you might as well repeat after me. Heat, beat, sheet. That is a helpful little rhyme that I like to use to help me remember all the steps of this recipe. So first off, heat. We're going to heat all of our ingredients except for the flour and the eggs. So I'm just going to turn this burner on medium-high. So I've got 1 cup of water here, 1 stick of unsalted butter, 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt, and 2 tablespoons of sugar. So that's just going to take a minute to come to a boil, and while it does, I thought I might take this time to tell you a little bit about the history of pâte à choux. So pâte à choux is actually a really old recipe. It was invented in the 1700s by a French pastry chef. So what he did is he put his dough into a little piping bag and he piped it into circles and baked it off. And when it came out of the oven, he thought the final product looked a lot like little cabbages. So that's why he decided to name the dough pâte à choux, which in French means cabbage dough. So we will be right back after this mixture comes to a boil, and I'll take you through the next steps. Okay, so I can see now that my mixture has come to a boil. So I'm going to take it off the burner. I'm going to turn off the heat. Okay, so we've completed the heat step, so now we're going to do beat. And what I mean by that is we're going to beat in our remaining ingredients. So right here we've got 1 cup plus 2 tablespoons of flour, all-purpose, and we're just going to dump it in all at once. Now, it's kind of counterintuitive because for most baking recipes, they're going to tell you add it little by little, like with cakes and cookies. But with pâte à choux, you really want to dump it in all at once, because what you're doing here is you're utilizing the residual heat in the pan to perform a really crucial reaction called starch gelatinization. I know that's a big word, but it's actually a pretty simple concept. So what's happening here is the heat is breaking bonds of the starch in the flour so that the starch molecules can go and interact with the water molecules and form bonds. So that's going to help the eclair or the beignet or whatever you're making to retain its structure when it expands in the oven. So on the topic of expanding in the oven, you might be wondering, how on earth do these things rise? I mean, there's no baking soda, there's no yeast, and those are traditional leaveners. So the ways that these eclairs are going to rise is through steam. Remember how we added at the beginning that big cup of water? Well, in the high heat of the oven, that water is going to evaporate and cause the eclair to expand. Now, the reason it doesn't collapse when it comes out of the oven is because another thing this heat in the pan is doing is it's denaturing something called gluten. And gluten is the protein in flour that causes things to want to contract. So by denaturing that protein, you're preventing that eclair from just completely deflating when it comes out of the oven. Okay, so I can see now that this mixture is homogeneous. So now I'm going to add my eggs. So I know we dumped the flour in all at once. I wish we could do the same with the eggs, but we're going to have to add them one at a time. And this isn't to make your life more difficult. There's a reason for this. There's actually a study done by Cooks Illustrated recently, and they found that if you add your eggs all at once, it takes 4 times as long to get your mixture to be homogeneous as opposed to adding it one by one. So the reason for that is because we're making an emulsion. And emulsions are when you mix 2 things that don't really want to mix together. So here we have a really watery substance. Eggs are 70% water. And we've got a heavily fatty substance, and we all know oil and water don't mix. It's the same thing with butter and eggs. So the way we overcome that resistance is just adding the eggs little by little. So I remember the first time I was making eclairs, I really freaked out at this step because it looks like you failed. It falls apart, it gets all weird and strange, but I promise you, if you just beat it for another 30 seconds, it all comes together. So I'll show you here in a second how it looks like it falls apart. Ready? Here goes our second egg. And immediately, the whole thing just sort of disintegrates. You're like, what happened? I promise, that's how it's supposed to be. And at this point, the pan has cooled off enough that it's not going to turn your eggs into scrambled eggs, so you don't have to worry about that. 2 more. And each time you're going to want to whisk until it's completely mixed in. Kind of a workout. Alrighty, so I can see now that the mixture is completely homogeneous. So we've done the heat step, we've done the beat step, now we're going to do the sheet step. And what I mean by that is we're going to transfer this dough into this piping bag right here, and we're going to pipe it onto our baking sheet. So as I do that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about this process. So you'll notice that I fitted this piping bag with a 1/2 inch star tip. Now I know that looks really small because when you have an eclair, it's not that skinny, you know, but the thing about that is this dough is going to expand a lot in the oven. So I remember the first time I made these, I had like a 2-inch tip, and oh my gosh, these eclairs, they were pudgy little guys, and that's fine. Not exactly elegant, not exactly what you're going for. All right. So it does leak out sometimes because it's warm, so I like to have a little glass nearby that I can rest it in. Now, before I pipe this dough onto the baking sheet, I'm going to take this pastry brush right here and brush a little bit of water on this parchment-lined sheet pan. And what that does is it creates like sort of a steamy environment in the oven, and that helps the eclairs to rise. So this is the fun part. So at this point, you could do a bunch of different things. You could pipe eclairs, which are traditionally 4 to 5 inches long, and that's what we're going to be doing today. But if you're feeling adventurous, you could also do cream puffs, would just be a little circle. You could try profiteroles, which would be a massive circle. Or you could do something called a Paris breast, which is just a little ring, and I'll show you what that looks like here in a sec. Now, this pastry was designed for a bicycle race that took place in the 1800s, and it was from the city of Paris to the town of Brest, France. And the idea was that this ring structure kind of looked like a bicycle wheel, and that was the idea that they used to promote the bike race. All right. So now that I've piped my eclairs, I'm going to pop them in a 400-degree oven for about 10 minutes, and I'm going to reduce the heat to 325 and bake them off for about 20 to 30 minutes. You're going to want to keep an eye on them so they don't burn. It depends on the size. So the reason we reduce the heat is because if you continued baking these for 400 degrees for that long, they would just be totally burnt to a crisp. So the high heat is going to evaporate all that steam immediately and cause them to puff up, and the low heat allows them to set up without burning. So after you've baked off your eclairs and they've cooled completely, then you can fill them and glaze them and drizzle them with whatever you want, decorate to your heart's delight. In terms of storage, I've got good news and bad news. The bad news is that filled and glazed eclairs only last for about 2 days in the fridge. But the good news is you're just going to have to find a way to get rid of a bunch of eclairs really fast, which is not necessarily a bad thing. So when they come out, they look a little bit like this. And obviously, you can get really creative with decor. If you're looking for ideas, I've got a few pictures posted on my Instagram account, Jill Bakes a Lot. So if you're looking for inspiration, you might check that out. And I guess with that, you'll have to excuse me because I've got to go feed the awesome filming crew who just filmed this for us. Thank you, guys. And of course, I wish you luck in all of your baking endeavors.